The large hall was filled with the sound of people talking. It was a fancy evening, the kind where everyone dresses up in their best clothes. There were expensive suits and long, colorful dresses everywhere. The room smelled of rich food and strong coffee. Waiters moved through the crowd holding silver trays with glasses of champagne and small fancy snacks. It was a charity event, meaning people had paid a lot of money to be there. They were there to help a good cause, but they were also there to be seen. They wanted to talk to their friends and make business deals. At the front of the room, there was a big stage. On the stage stood a grand piano. It was black and shiny, looking like a giant piece of polished glass. It sat there quietly, waiting for someone to play it. Most of the people in the room were not really looking at the stage. They were busy looking at their phones or shaking hands with new people. They were drinking wine and laughing at jokes. The noise in the room was loud and constant. It was a happy noise. It was also a noise that showed people weren't really listening to each other. Then, the lights in the hall changed a little bit. The spots on the stage turned on, making the piano glow. The people in the back of the room didn't notice right away, but the people near the front stopped talking. A man walked out onto the stage. He was the host for the night. He tapped the microphone to make sure it was working. A loud, screeching sound came through the speakers. That made everyone look up. The talking in the room got quieter. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said. His voice echoed through the hall. "Please take your seats. We have a very special treat for you tonight." The people slowly moved toward the round tables that were set up in front of the stage. They sat down in their chairs, but they were still restless. Silverware clinked against plates. Napkins were being placed on laps. Many people whispered to the person sitting next to them, asking who was coming to perform. They expected a famous singer or a well-known band from the city. They were ready to be entertained, but they were also ready to be critical. If the act wasn't good, they would just go back to talking and drinking. The host smiled at the crowd. "We have a young musician with us today," he explained. "He is a local boy, but he has a gift that you have to hear to believe. He recently won a big competition for young players. Please welcome him to the stage." The host clapped his hands. A few people in the front clapped politely out of kindness. There was no loud cheer yet. The crowd was still curious, but unsure. They didn't know what to expect. From the side of the stage, a small door opened. Two people walked out. One was a woman, likely the boy's mother. She was dressed simply, but nicely. She walked close to the boy. The boy was small. He looked like he was only 10 or 11 years old. He wore a neat white shirt and black trousers. He walked slowly, carefully lifting his feet as he felt his way across the stage. It was then that the entire room noticed he was wearing dark glasses. He was blind. A hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't a respectful silence yet, but a silence of surprise. The guests watched closely as the mother led her son to the piano bench. She helped him find his spot. She didn't say anything to him. She just gently touched his shoulder as if to say, "You are safe. I am here." Then she stepped back into the shadows. The boy sat down on the long bench. He was so small that his feet did not reach the floor. They dangled in the air for a moment before he found the foot pedals and adjusted his posture. He took a deep breath. You could see his chest rise and fall. He seemed to be taking a moment to listen to the room. He couldn't see the hundreds of eyes staring at him. He couldn't see the expensive chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. He couldn't see the people holding their drinks. But he could feel the energy in the room. He sat very still for a few seconds. He reached his hands out and hovered them over the keys. He wasn't touching them yet. He was just sensing where they were. The white and black keys were like old friends to him. For a blind person, the piano is not just an instrument. It is a way to see the world. It is how he speaks when he cannot look someone in the eye. Some people in the audience shifted in their chairs. A few whispered to their neighbors. "Is he really going to play?" Someone asked. "He is so young," another person said, "and he cannot see the music." The doubt was clear in the air. The crowd was used to professionals, adults, who had been playing for decades. They didn't know how a blind child could handle a massive, complex instrument like the one sitting on the stage. The boy didn't seem to hear the whispers. Or maybe he just didn't care. He sat with perfect posture. His back was straight. His dark glasses hid his eyes, but his face was calm. He looked confident. He wasn't nervous like a normal child might be in front of a room full of strangers. He looked like he was in his own world, a world where the only thing that mattered was the touch of his fingertips on the ivory keys. The mother stood in the wings, watching him. Her hands were clasped together tightly. She knew what her son could do. She had heard him practicing in their living room every day. She knew the magic he held inside him, but she also knew how harsh the world could be. She worried that the crowd wouldn't understand. She worried they would see only his disability and not his ability. The boy lifted his hands a little higher. The silence in the room grew heavier. It was the kind of silence that happens just before something important is about to happen. The waiter stopped moving in the back. The glasses stopped clinking. Everyone looked at the small boy sitting alone on the big stage. He was just a child. He had to navigate a world of darkness every single day. He had to learn to walk, to read, to eat, and to dress without seeing. And now, he was sitting in front of a crowd of strangers who were waiting to be impressed. It was a big moment for anyone, let alone a young boy. The pressure was in the air, thick and heavy. But then, the boy smiled a tiny smile. It was just a small turn of his lips, almost invisible to the people in the back row. He was ready. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to show them that even without sight, he had a vision. He was going to show them that music lives in the heart, not in the eyes. His fingers lowered slowly. They made contact with the keys. The first note was about to be played. The crowd held its collective breath. The boy took another deep breath, filling his lungs with air. He was the conductor of the moment. The piano was his orchestra, and the hundreds of people watching him were about to become his students. He wasn't just a boy on a bench anymore. He was a musician about to tell a story. The room was completely quiet now. Not a single person was speaking. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. The anticipation was at its peak. The boy's small hands were steady. He didn't rush. He played the first chord. The moment his fingers touched the keys, the sound that came out was not loud or aggressive. It was soft, like a whisper. The first note hung in the air, clear and pure. It was a single sound, but it seemed to freeze time in the big hall. People who were still turning their heads to look at their programs or their drinks stopped moving. That single note commanded attention. It was the kind of sound that makes you want to hold your breath so you don't miss what comes next. The boy didn't rush. He let that note fade away into the silence. Then his right hand began to move slowly down the keys. He played a melody that was sad but beautiful. It was not a happy children's song, and it was not a loud, banging tune. It was complex and emotional. The notes flowed like water moving down a stream. They were smooth and connected to one another. It sounded like he was telling a secret to the piano. The piano was whispering it back to the room. At the tables near the front, the guests stopped checking their phones. A man in a gray suit, who had been talking loudly about his business deal just a minute ago, put his hand down on the table. He forgot about his wine. He forgot about his money. He just stared at the stage. He looked confused. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a simple performance, maybe a little boring because the player was just a child. But this was different. This sounded like a professional musician who had played for 50 years. The boy's left hand joined in. It played low notes that gave the music a deep heartbeat rhythm. The sound filled the huge room. The acoustics in the hall were perfect for a piano, and every vibration traveled to the back walls. The music felt like it was wrapping itself around the audience. It was a jazz piece, but it was a very slow, classical kind of jazz. It had a sophisticated feeling to it, something that adults usually enjoy, not something a child would choose. The boy sat very still. His upper body did not move much. Only his hands and his arms were dancing across the keys. His head tilted slightly to the right. Behind his dark glasses, his eyes were closed, focusing entirely on the sound. He wasn't reading music because there was no sheet music on the stand. He was playing from memory. He was playing from his heart. People in the back rose. Couldn't see the boy's face clearly, started to pay attention to. The noise of the crowd had completely vanished. No one was whispering anymore. No one was laughing. The only thing you could hear was the music. It was amazing how one small boy could control a room full of hundreds of people just by moving his fingers. The power wasn't in his muscles. It was in the emotion he was putting into the song. As the melody continued, it became more intricate. The boy's fingers moved faster now. They jumped from the low end of the piano to the high end. He played notes that were very close together, creating a rippling sound. It sounded like rain falling on a tin roof. The rhythm was steady, but it wasn't stiff. It had a natural swing to it. He played with a touch that was incredibly gentle, even when the notes became fast and many. He never hit a wrong note. It was perfect. A woman near the stage leaned forward in her chair. She rested her chin on her hand. She watched the boy's hands closely. She was a musician herself, or at least she loved music very much. She could see that his technique was unique. Because he couldn't see the keys, he had memorized the distance between every note. He knew exactly how hard to press each key to get the sound he wanted. It was as if the piano was a part of his body. He didn't need to look at it to know where to go. He could feel it. The music started to change. It was getting stronger. The quiet, mysterious beginning was starting to build up. The boy pressed the pedals with his feet, making the sound sustain and ring out louder. The music filled every corner of the hall. It washed over the expensive decorations, the fancy chandeliers, and the rows of well-dressed people. For a few minutes, nobody thought about their social status. Nobody thought about who was rich and who was not. They were all just listeners, united by the sound coming from the stage. The boy's face looked peaceful. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't look nervous either. He looked completely at home. In his dark, silent world, music was his color. Music was how he painted pictures. When he played a high, bright note, maybe he saw the color yellow in his mind. When he played the low, deep notes, maybe he saw the color blue or purple. He was sharing that painting with everyone in the room. The crowd was beginning to realize something special was happening. The skepticism was gone. The doubt that had filled the room when he first walked out had disappeared. Nobody was thinking, he is just a blind kid. They were thinking he is a genius. It is rare to see someone so young do something so difficult with such ease. It made the adults in the room feel humble. It reminded them that talent doesn't care about age or physical ability. Talent just shines through. The boy's hands moved to the middle of the piano. He played a series of chords that harmonized perfectly. The sound was rich and warm. It felt like a hug. It was a comforting sound, but there was still a hint of sadness to it. It was the kind of music that makes you think about memories. It made people think about their own childhoods, or about people they missed. It was emotional without trying too hard. It was honest. The lights on the stage reflected off the shiny black surface of the piano. The boy was a silhouette against the brightness, but he was the focus. The waiters in the back of the room had stopped serving. They stood near the walls, holding their trays, watching the boy. Even the people working at the event were captured by the performance. When the staff stops working to watch, you know the performance is good. He played a run of notes that went up and down the scale, faster than a blink of an eye. It sounded like a cascade of crystal beads falling. The audience almost gasped, but they stayed quiet so they wouldn't break the spell. How could someone so small create such a big sound? How could someone who lived in darkness create such bright music? It was a beautiful mystery. The boy took a small breath. The music was leading up to something. The gentle introduction was over. The story he was telling with the piano was about to get more intense. The quiet wonder of the first few minutes was preparing them for a storm. The boy's body tensed up just a little bit, ready to put more energy into the instrument. The audience could feel the change in the air. They leaned in closer. They didn't want to miss a single beat. They were hooked. The silence in the room was no longer just polite. It was amazed. The boy had proved them wrong in the best way possible. He wasn't just playing the piano. He was mastering it. And the best part was, he was just getting started. The melody was rising, growing stronger and deeper. pulling everyone along with him, ready for the next part of the journey. The gentle melody that had held the room in a soft trance began to change. The boy's hands, which had been moving with a careful, delicate touch, suddenly pressed down with more force. The quiet, whispering notes were gone. In their place came a sound that was bold and loud. The music was no longer just a story. It was becoming a storm. The rhythm shifted. It became faster and more intense. The low notes on the left side of the piano started to rumble like thunder in the distance. The boy's body changed too. He wasn't sitting still anymore. He began to sway from side to side. He would lean forward toward the keys when the music went high, and then rock back when the music went low. It looked like he was fighting with the piano, but in a friendly way. He was wrestling a beautiful sound out of it. The small boy on the bench seemed to grow bigger in that moment. He wasn't just a child anymore. He was a powerful force of nature. The people in the audience felt this change instantly. The atmosphere in the room tightened. It felt like the air was charged with electricity. The man in the gray suit, who had been so relaxed, straightened his back. His eyes opened wide. He could feel the beat of the music in his chest. It was thumping like a second heartbeat. The woman who had been resting her chin on her hand sat up straight. She stopped analyzing the notes and just let the music wash over her. The boy's fingers were flying now. They moved so fast that they were almost a blur. It was incredible to watch. He played complicated patterns that would take a normal person years to learn. His left hand was jumping up and down the lower keys, playing a driving rhythm that made you want to tap your foot. His right hand was dancing on the high keys, playing a tune that was sharp and bright. The two hands were doing completely different things, yet they fit together perfectly. It was like two different people playing at the same time. But it was all coming from one brain. Because he was blind, his other senses were stronger. He could hear the vibration of the strings inside the piano better than anyone else. He could feel the wood shaking under his feet. He used this connection to pour every ounce of his emotion into the instrument. He wasn't just playing notes on a page. He was playing his feelings. He was playing the frustration of not being able to see, the joy of being able to make music, and the excitement of being on stage. All those feelings came out through his fingertips. The sound grew louder and fuller. The boy was using the pedals to make the notes sustain and blend together. The music filled every corner of the giant hall. It bounced off the high ceiling and the velvet curtains. It wrapped around the columns and the tables. The sound was so big that it felt like it was lifting the roof off the building. The grand piano, which was a heavy, silent object a few minutes ago, was now roaring like a lion. The crowd was completely captivated. You could see it on their faces. The skepticism was long gone. The curiosity had turned into pure amazement. Mouths were slightly open. Eyes were glued to the stage. No one was looking at their watches. No one was thinking about dinner. The outside world didn't exist anymore. There was only the music and the boy. The piece he was playing had a lot of drama in it. It would get very fast and loud, and then suddenly drop down to a quiet, gentle hum before exploding back into noise again. He played these stops and starts perfectly. He controlled the mood of the entire room. When he played softly, the audience held its breath, afraid to make a sound. When he played loudly, the audience felt a rush of adrenaline. It's like they were on a roller coaster. He hit a series of chords that were so powerful they seemed to shake the floor. His arms moved up and down, striking the keys with passion. He was sweating a little now from the effort. But he didn't look tired. He looked alive. He looked like this was exactly where he was meant to be. The dark glasses stayed on his face, hiding his eyes, but his expressions showed everything. A small frown of concentration appeared on his face. He bit his lips slightly as he navigated a difficult section of the song, but he never hesitated. He never faltered. He played with total confidence. The people in the back rows were standing up now. They couldn't see the boy's hands clearly from that far away, but they could feel the energy. They stood to get a better view of this small figure creating such a huge sound. A group of young people near the bar stopped their conversation completely. They were watching, mesmerized. Even the people who didn't know much about classical music or jazz could tell that this was something special. You don't need to be an expert to feel passion. You don't need to study music to recognize talent when it is standing. Right in front of you, the music was telling a story of struggle and triumph. It sounded like a battle. There were moments of darkness and discord, notes that clashed together. But then they would resolve into something beautiful and harmonious. It was the sound of overcoming obstacles. It was the sound of someone finding their way in the dark. This message hit the audience hard. Many of them were successful people who had fought their own battles to get where they were. They heard their own stories in the music. The boy's hands moved to the high end of the piano again. He played a fast, intricate run of notes that sparkled like stars. It was dizzying to watch. The speed and precision were breathtaking. And just as quickly, he slammed his hands down on the low keys, creating a crash of sound that made everyone jump slightly in their seats. He had them in the palm of his hand. He was the master of the moment. The MC, who was standing in the wings of the stage, had his arms crossed over his chest. He was watching with a huge smile on his face. He knew the talent this boy had, but seeing it in front of a live crowd was different. He looked out at the audience and saw the transformation. He saw the bored-rich crowd turn into a group of moved, emotional human beings. That is the magic of music. It breaks down walls. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, young or old. When you hear something beautiful, it touches your soul. The boy was reaching the climax of the performance. The intensity was almost too much to bear. The music was rushing forward, like a river heading toward a waterfall. The boy was moving his whole body now, swaying and nodding to the rhythm. He was lost in the music, completely unaware of the hundreds of people staring at him. He was in a zone where nothing else existed. It was just him and the sound. He was pouring his heart out, leaving everything on the stage. He wasn't holding anything back. The audience could feel the end coming. The music was building up, higher and louder, gathering all the energy in the room. It was like a tornado spinning around the stage. The anticipation was incredible. Everyone knew that something huge was about to happen. The boy lifted his hands high above his head, his fingers stretched out, ready to strike the final chords. The room waited, suspended in a moment of perfect tension. The boy was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. He was ready to bring it all home. He was ready to show them the final, powerful explosion of sound. The boy looked down at the keys, and with a burst of energy, he brought his hands down for the finale. The boy's hands crashed down on the keys for the final chords. It wasn't just a loud noise. It was a wave of sound that seemed to crash over the entire audience. The piano roared, vibrating with such power that you could feel the wooden floorboards trembling under your feet. The sound was massive, filling every corner of the hall, bouncing off the high ceiling and shaking the windows. It was the kind of sound that clears your mind completely. For that split second, there was no noise, no applause, no breathing. There was just that overwhelming, beautiful wall of sound washing over everyone then. As the vibration of the strings inside the piano began to fade, the boy slowly lifted his hands off the keys. He didn't pull them away quickly. He let them float upward, like he was releasing a bird into the air. The very last notes lingered in the room, echoing softly, growing quieter and quieter. The boy kept his foot on the pedal, letting the sound sustain until it was almost impossible to hear. He sat there, perfectly still, with his hands resting on his lap. He was listening to the silence that followed the noise. The audience was frozen. It was one of the strangest silences the hall had ever known. Usually at the end of a performance, there is a moment of polite clapping or maybe the sound of people shifting in their seats, clearing their throats or whispering to their neighbors. But this time, there was absolutely nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room had been turned to stone. The power of the music had left them speechless. In that quiet moment, people began to look around. They looked at the stage, and then they looked at each other. And what they saw surprised them. They saw that they weren't the only ones affected. The man in the gray suit, the one who had been talking about business deals at the start, was sitting with his elbows on the table. His face was buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking slightly. He wasn't making a sound, but it was clear he was crying. The tough, serious look he had when he walked in was completely gone. The music had broken through his armor. Near the front, the woman who had been resting her chin on her hand was wiping her eyes with a white handkerchief. Her makeup was running a little bit, but she didn't care. She wasn't embarrassed. She looked at the boy on the stage with a look of pure love and admiration. She felt like she had witnessed a miracle. It is rare to see something that touches your heart so deeply that you forget about your appearance, your status, and your surroundings. The music had stripped away all the fake layers of the evening. Tears were flowing all over the room. It wasn't just a few people here and there. It was a collective wave of emotion. A wealthy man in a tuxedo who likely managed millions of dollars was crying openly without even checking to see if anyone was watching. A young woman in the back holding a champagne glass had tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving wet tracks on her face. Even the waiters standing against the walls had tears in their eyes. They were looking at the floor, trying to hide their emotion, but they were just as moved as the guests. Why were they crying? It wasn't just because the music was sad or beautiful. It was because of the story behind the music. The audience had just watched a young boy who lived in total darkness create something full of light. They had watched a child, small and fragile, conquer a giant instrument. They saw a person who had every reason to give up or feel sorry for himself, instead choosing to create something magnificent. It was a moment of pure triumph of the human spirit. It reminded everyone that despite our problems, despite our differences, we all share the same feelings. We all know what struggle is, and we all know what joy feels like. The boy had spoken to them without saying a single word. The contrast between the beginning of the night and this moment was shocking. When the boy walked out, people saw a blind boy. They saw a disability. They saw something to be pitied or ignored. Now, looking at him sitting there quietly, they saw a genius. They saw a master. They realized that their judgment had been wrong. They felt a sense of humility. They realized that true talent doesn't come from the eyes. It comes from the soul. The boy couldn't see the audience, but he saw them better than anyone else could. He saw their hearts. The silence stretched on. It must have been 10 or 15 seconds, but it felt like an hour. No one wanted to be the first to break the spell. They didn't want to ruin the moment with noise. They wanted to hold on to that feeling of connection for just a little longer. The boy on the stage turned his head slightly, perhaps sensing the change in the air. He knew they were there. He could feel their energy. He sat calmly, waiting, breathing slowly. He didn't look like he was seeking approval. He just looked like he was satisfied that he had done his job. The mother, who was standing in the shadows, peeked out to look at the crowd. She saw the tears and the still faces. She put her hand over her mouth. She was used to her son playing beautifully, but to see this reaction from a room full of strangers was overwhelming. It was validation for all the hard work, all the hours of practice, and all the struggles they had gone through as a family. It was a moment of pure pride. Suddenly a voice from the back let out a loud sob. It was a raw, human sound. That sound seemed to break the dam. It was like the first drop of rain before a storm. People realized they were allowed to react. The spell of silence wasn't broken. It transformed into something else. It transformed into an outpouring of emotion. The audience started to breathe again. They let out the breath they had been holding. The room felt like it was waking up from a deep trance. The air felt electric. The emotional energy was so high, it felt like the room might explode. The boy sat with his hands on his knees, small feet dangling above the pedals. He didn't know that people were crying, but he could feel the waves of respect and awe hitting the stage. He could feel the change in the atmosphere. The coldness of the charity gala was gone. The artificial distance between the performer and the audience was gone. In that silence, they had all become one. A young blind boy had taken a room full of strangers and turned them into a community. He had taught them a lesson about life without giving a speech. He just played. The anticipation built up to a breaking point. The audience realized that the performance was truly over. They knew they had to respond. They couldn't just sit there and let this moment pass. They needed to show him what they felt. They needed to give back a little bit of the love he had given them. The silence began to crack. Someone near the front clapped their hands together once, a sharp, loud sound that echoed through the hall. It was the starting gun. The signal. It was time for the world to wake up and cheer. That single clap was like a spark landing on dry grass. Instantly, the whole room caught fire. The silence shattered into 1,000 pieces. The silence that had been so heavy and respectful just a moment before was gone, replaced by a chaotic, roaring wave of sound. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was an explosion. Hundreds of people jumped to their feet at the exact same time. The sound of hands smacking together was deafening, louder than the piano had been at its peak. "Bravo!" Someone shouted from the back. "Bravo!" The applause was not neat or organized. It was a raw, emotional release. People were stamping their feet on the floor. Whistles pierced the air. The noise washed over the stage like a physical force. The hall, which had been a place of stiff formality just 20 minutes ago, was now alive with energy. It felt like a sporting event or a rock concert. The dignity of the black tie event was forgotten. Everyone was caught up in the moment. They wanted to give back the energy they had received. They wanted the boy to know that he had moved them. The boy on the bench heard the noise. He turned his head slightly toward the sound, a small, shy smile appearing on his face. He knew this sound. He knew he had done well. He hadn't failed. He hadn't disappointed them. He had conquered. The tension left his small shoulders. He let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for the entire song. He put his hands on his knees and pushed himself up to stand. He was a little wobbly from sitting still for so long, but he stood tall. As he stood, the cheering got even louder. It was a crescendo of appreciation. The audience was not just cheering for the music. They were cheering for the human spirit. They were cheering for the victory of talent over circumstance. People in the front rows were reaching out their hands toward the stage as if they wanted to touch the magic they had just seen. Some people were still crying, but now they were crying and smiling at the same time. It was a release of emotion that had been building up inside them. The boy's mother walked out from the shadows of the wing. Her movements were quick but graceful. She went to her son and gently placed a hand on his back. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just wanted to be there to support him. She guided him a step forward to the center of the stage. The boy faced the crowd, but he didn't see their faces. He didn't see the tears or the standing ovation. He couldn't see the bright flashes of cameras going off in the distance, capturing the moment. But he could feel it. He could feel the vibration of the floorboards from the stomping feet. He could hear the love in their voices. He could feel the warmth of their approval washing over him. He bowed. It was a simple, polite bow. He bent at the waist, his dark glasses facing the floor. He held the pose for a second, then stood up straight again. When he arose, the applause spiked again. It was like the crowd was saying, "No, don't go. We love you." A man in the third row threw a single red rose onto the stage. It landed near the boy's feet. Then another flower appeared. Then another. Soon, the stage was beginning to fill with colorful tributes. The boy reached out and found his mother's hand. He held it tight. She squeezed his hand back. It was a silent exchange of love and pride between them. They had walked onto this stage as a small mother and son, but now they felt like giants. They had faced a room full of judgment and doubt, and they had won. The boy turned his face toward his mother, and his smile grew wider. It was a smile of pure happiness. It was the smile of a child who knows his parents are proud. The MC walked back onto the stage. He tried to speak into the microphone, but the crowd was too loud. He held up his hands, motioning for them to quiet down, but it took a long time. People didn't want to stop cheering. They didn't want the night to end. Finally, the roar settled down enough for him to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his own voice sounding a bit shaky and emotional. "Give him another hand." That was Boy's name. The crowd erupted again. The boy just stood there, soaking it in. He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he just kept holding his mother's. The MC patted the boy gently on the shoulder. The boy flinched slightly at the unexpected touch, but then relaxed. He was the center of the universe right now. As the applause began to slow down just a little, people started to turn to each other. They started talking again, but it was different than before. They weren't talking about business or clothes. They were talking about what they had just felt. "I have never seen anything like that in my life," a woman whispered to her husband. He just nodded, unable to speak, wiping a tear from his cheek. "He plays like an angel," someone else said. "To think he can't even see the keys?" The boy and his mother began to walk slowly off the stage. He took careful steps, feeling his way with his feet and trusting his mother to guide him. As they reached the side of the stage, the boy stopped. He let go of his mother's hand for a split second and turned back toward the piano. He reached out and touched the smooth black wood one last time. It was a goodbye to his friend, a thank you to the instrument that had given him a voice. Then he turned back and took his mother's hand again. They walked into the wings and disappeared from view. As soon as they were gone, the crowd let out a final, collective sigh. The spell was broken, but the memory was burned into their minds. The lights on the stage dimmed, making the grand piano look like a shadow. In the lobby after the show, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the stiff, cold networking that usually happens at these galas, people were hugging each other. Strangers were talking to strangers. They were sharing how the music made them feel. It seemed that the boys' performance had opened a door in everyone's hearts. They were kinder to each other. They were softer. The boy sat in a small dressing room backstage, drinking a bottle of water. He was tired but happy. He didn't know that he had changed the world a little bit that night. He didn't know that hundreds of people would go home and hug their children a little tighter. He didn't know that people would remember his performance for the rest of their lives. He just knew that he had played his heart out and that people had clapped, and that was enough. Because in the end, the story wasn't about a blind boy who could play the piano. It was about how we all have obstacles. It was about how we all have darkness in our lives. But it was also about how, if we have the courage to share our gifts, we can turn that darkness into light. We can connect with others in ways we never thought possible. The boy walked out of the dressing room, holding his mother's hand, ready to go home. The gala was over. The music had stopped, but the feeling remained. A feeling of hope, a feeling of wonder, a feeling that, even in a world full of noise and distraction, true beauty can still stop us in our tracks and make us listen. And sometimes that beauty comes from the most unexpected places, like a small boy sitting at a piano, playing in the dark.